Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Thucydides Peloponnesian War. We are now in the continuing our next section, which deals with the winter of the eighth year. We're still in technically in book four. We're going to be looking at chapters 89, 88, 89 to 116, 115, 116. So let's start. We're using the landmark Thucydides, the Crawley translation, but the one we're doing is showing you on YouTube, so you'll be seeing the Google Books version, which is okay-ish. Um, I'm recovering from a little bit of a cold, not COVID, but the cold still sticking with me. So we'll start. It was the first day of the winter following that the places in Botia were to be put into the hands of the Athenian generals, Hippocrates and Demosthenes, and later the latter of whom was to go with his ships to Saphia, the former to Delium. A mistake, however, was made in the days on which they were to start, and Demosthenes, sailing first to Saphi with the Arcanians and the allies from those part on board, failed to effect anything because the plot had been betrayed by Nicodemus, a Phoenician from Pantos, who informed the Spartans, and they the Boeotians. Helped accordingly, flocked in from all parts of Boeotia, and since Hippocrates had not entered the country to make his diversion, Seppi and Korea were promptly secured, and the conspirators, informed of the mistake, did not cause any trouble in the cities. Meanwhile, Hippocrates called out the Athenians in full force, citizens and resident aliens, and the foreigners in Athens, and arrived at his destination after the Boeotians had already come back from Sepe, and encamped his army, began to fortify and the sanctuary of Apollo at Delium in the following manner. The trench was dug all around the temple and the consecrated ground, and the earth thrown up from the excavation was made to do duty as a wall, and it was and which stakes were also planted, and the vines around the sanctuary being cut down and thrown in, together with stones and bricks pulled down from the houses near, using in short every means to build a rampart. Wooden towers were also erected where they were wanted, and there was no part of the temple building left standing, as on the side where the gallery once existing had fallen in. The work was begun on the third day after leaving home, and continued during the fourth till the dinner time on the fifth, when most of it being now finished, the army marched about a mile and a quarter from Delium on its way home. From this point, most of the light troops went straight on, and the hoplites halted and remained where they were. Hippocrates staying behind at Delium to arrange the posts and give directions for the completion of such part of the works that were left unfinished. During the day, thus employed, the Boeotians were mustering at Tanagra, and by the time they had come in from all the cities, they found the Athenians already on their way home. The rest of the 11 Botarchs were against giving battle, as the enemy was no longer in Botia, the Athenians having just crossed over the Orphean border, and which they halted. But Pagodas, son of Areoclides, one of the Botarchs of Thebes, uh, Arist, Aristander, son of Lachemechides, being the other, And then commander in chief thought it was best to fight a battle. He accordingly called the men to him, company after company, to all their prevent their all leaving their arms at once, and urged them back to attack the Athenians. And face the hazard of a battle, speaking as follows. This is a speech. Boeotians, the idea that we ought not to give the battle to the Athenians unless we come upon them at Boeotia is one we should never have entered into the head of any of us, your generals. It was to damage Boeotia that they came across the frontier and built a fort in our country. And they are, therefore, I imagine, our enemies wherever we may come upon them, wherever they may come to act as enemies do. And if anyone has taken up with the idea, uh, um, taking up with the idea in question for reasons of safety, it is high time for him to change his mind. The party attacked, whose own country is in danger, can scarcely discuss what is prudent with the calmness of men who are in full enjoyment of what they have and are thinking of attacking a neighbor in order to get more. It is your national it is your natural habit to resist a foreign invader regardless of whether he is in your country or not. And when that invader is Athenian and lives on your frontier as well, it is doubly imperative to do so. As between neighbors generally, freedom means simply a determination to hold one's own. And with neighbors like these who are trying to enslave near and far alike, there is nothing but it to fight. Is nothing for it but to fight it out to the last. Look at the condition of the Euboeans and most of the rest of the Hellenists, and you will be convinced that while to others have to I lost that place for a second. Have to fight with their neighbors at frontier. No, convinced that while others have to fight with their neighbors for this frontier or that, for us being conquered means one frontier for the whole country, about which there will be no dispute, for they will simply come and take by force what we have. So much more have we to fear from this neighbor than from anyone. Besides, people who, like the Athenians in the present instance, are tempted by pride of strength to attack their neighbors, usually march more confidently against those who keep still and only defend themselves in their own country. But think twice before they grapple with those who meet them outside their frontiers and strike the first blow of opportunities offers. The Athenians have shown us this themselves. The defeat which we inflicted upon them at Corina at the time when our quarrel had allowed them to occupy the country had given great security to Boeotia until the present day. Remember this: the old must equal their ancient exploits, and the sons of the heroes of that time, must endure not to disgrace their native valor, entrusting in the help of the gods whose temples have been sacrilegiously fortified, and in the victims which we have, when we sacrificed, appeared propitious. We must march against the enemy and teach him that he must go and get what he wants by attacking someone who will not resist him, but that men whose glories it is always to ready to give battle for liberty of their own country and never unjustly to enslave that of others will not let him go without a struggle. By these arguments, Pagodanas persuaded the Boeotians to attack the Athenians, and quickly breaking up his camp, led his army towards forward. Being now late in the day, on nearing the enemy, he halted in a position where a hill intervened between the two armies from seeing each other, and then formed and prepared for action. Meanwhile, Hippocrates at Delum, informed of the approach of the Boeotians, sent orders to his troops to throw themselves into line, and he himself joined them not long after, leaving about 300 horse behind him at Delos to guard the palace in case of attack, and at the same time to watch their opportunity to fall upon the Boeotians during battle. The Boeotians placed a detachment to deal with these, and when everything was arranged to their satisfaction, appealed over the hill and halted in order in the order which they had decided on, to the number of 7,000 hoplites, more than 10,000 light troops, and 1,000 horse, and 500 pillars. On the right, the Thebans and those of their division, and the center, the Hartatans, Coratians, uh, 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 Cor- the Coronations, the Coparians, and the other people around the lake on the left of the Theapines, the Tenegram, and the Orchomenians, the cavalry and light troops being on the extremities of its wings. The Thebans formed 25 shield formed 25 shield deep. The rest they as they pleased. Such was the strength and disposition of the Boeotian army. On the side of the Athenians, the hoplite throughout the whole army formed 8 deep, being a number equal, in number equal to the enemy, and cavalry upon the two wings. Light troops regularly armed there were none in the army, nor had there ever been at Athens. Those who joined the invasion, though many times were more numerous than those of the enemies, were mostly followed unarmed as part of the citizens and foreigners of Athens, and having started first on their way home, were not present in any number. The armies now being their armies being now in line and upon the point of engaging, Hippocrates, general, passed along the Athenian ranks and encouraged as follows: Athenians, I shall only say a few words to you, but brave men require no more, and they are addressed more by your understanding than your courage. None of you suppose that we are going out of our country to run going out of our way. None, suppose that we are going out of our way to run this risk in the country of another. Fought in their territory, the battle will be for ours. If we conquer, the Peloponnesians will never invade your country without the Boeotian horse. And in one battle, you will win Boeotia and in a manner Phreatica. Advance to meet them like citizens of a country in which you all glory as the first in Hellenes, and like sons of the fathers who beat them at Opetena with Mirandes, and thus gain possession of Boeotia. Hippocrates got halfway through the army with his exhortation. Then, when the Boeotians, after a few more hasty words from Creticus, struck up the paean and came against them from the hill, the Athenians advanced to meet them at a closing run. The extreme wing of neither army came into action, like the others being stopped by water courses in the way. The rest engaged with utmost obstinacy, shield against shield. The Boeotian left at first as far as the center. The worst was worsened by the Athenians. The Thepians in that part of the field suffered most severely. The troops alongside had them having given way and were surrounded in a narrow space and cut down, fighting hand to hand. Some of the Athenians also fell into confusion, surrounding the enemy and mistook and so killed each other. In this part of the field, the Boeotians were beaten and retreated upon the troops still fighting. But the right, where the Phoebians were, got the better of the Athenians and shoved them further and further back, though gradually at first. So it happened that Patagas, seeing the distress of the left, sent his had sent two squadron of horse, where they could not be seen round the hill, and their sudden appearance struck panic into the victorious wing of the Athenians, who thought that it was another army coming against them. At length, at length, in both parts of the field, disturbed by this panic, and with the line broken by the advancing Thebans, the whole Athenian army took to flight. Some made for Delium and others sea, but some for Opus. Others the Mount Paranus or wherever they had hopes for safety, pursued and cut down by the Boeotians and particularly by the cavalry, composed of Boeotians and partly by Locrians, who had just come up, who had just come as the rout began. Night, however, coming on to interrupt the pursuit, and the mass of the fugitives escaped more easily than they would have otherwise had done. The next day, the troops at Opidus and Delium returned home by sea, leaving a garrison later, which they continued to hold, notwithstanding the defeat. The Boeotians set up a trophy, took their own dead, and stripped those of the enemy, and leaving a guard over them, retired to Tigris, there to take measures for attacking Delum. Um, Meanwhile, a herald came from the Athenians, asked for the dead, but was met and turned back by a Boeotian herald, who told him that he would effect nothing until the return of himself, the Boeotian, until the return of himself, the Boeotian herald, who was then went on to Athens and told them on behalf of the Boeotians that they had done a wrong and transgression the laws of the Hellenes. Of what use was the universal custom protecting the temples in the in an invading country of the if the Athenians were to fortify Delium and live there, acting exactly as they were on unconsecrated ground and drawing and using for their own purposes the water in which they, the Boeotians, never touched except for sacred uses. Accordingly, for the gods, as they were as from themselves, in the name of the deities concerned in Apollo, and Boeotians called on them first to evacuate the temple if they wished to take the dead before that belongs to them. After these words from the herald, the Athenians sent their own heralds to the Boeotians, said that they had not done any wrong to the temple, and for the future would do it no more harm than they could help, not having occupied it originally for this purpose, but to defend themselves from it against those who were really wronging them. And the laws of the Hellenes was that conquest of a country, whether more or less extensive, carried with it the possession of the temples of that country, with the obligation to keep up the usual ceremonies, or at least as far as possible. The Boeotians and most other peoples who had turned out the owners of the country, and put themselves in the place by force, now held as of right the temples which they originally entered as usurpers. If the Athenians could have conquered more of Boeotia, this would have been the case with them, as things stood. And the piece of it which they had got, they should treat as their own, and not quit unless obliged. The water they distributed out of necessity, which they had not wantonly incurred, having been forced to use in defending themselves against the Boeotians, who had first invaded Attica. Besides, anything done under the pressure of war and danger might reasonably claim indulgence even in the eyes of the gods. Or why pray were the altars why were the altars the asylum for involuntary offenses? Transgression also was a term applied to presumptuous offenders, not to the victims of adverse circumstances. And so, sure, which were most important, the Boeotians who wished to barter dead bodies for holy places, or the Athenians who refused to give up holy places to attain what was theirs by right. Conditions of evacuating Boeotia must therefore be withdrawn. They were no longer Boeotia. They stood where they stood by right of sword. All of the Boeotians had to do was to tell them to take their dead under the truce according to the custom, the law, nomos. The Boeotians replied that they were Boeotians and must evacuate the country before taking up their dead. If they were, if they were in their territory, they would do as they pleased, for they knew that though the territory Upers were the bodies, as chance were lying, the battle having been fought on the borders were subject to Athens. Yet the Athenians could not get them without their leave. Beside, why should they grant a truce for Athenian ground? And what could be fairer than to tell the Athenians to evacuate Boeotia if they wished to get what they asked? The Athenians' herald accordingly returned with the answer, having thus been accomplished his object, without having accomplished his object. Meanwhile, the Boeotians at once sent for daughters and slingers from the Malayan Gulf and 2,000 Corinthian hoplites who had joined them in the battle in the Peloponnesian garrison, which had evacuated Nicaea and some Megarians, and with them marched against Elam and attacked the fort. And after dire efforts, finally succeeded in taking by means of a device the following descriptions. They soared into and scoped out a great beam from end to end, and fitting it nicely together like a flute, hung a chain, a, a cauldron of one extremity, and there was a free passage to an iron tube projecting from the beam, which was itself in the great part placed in iron. This they brought up from a distance upon carts to the parts of the wall principally composed of vines and timber, and when it was near, inserted huge bellows into the ends of the beams and blew it with them. The blast passing closely combined into the cauldron, which was filled with lighted coals, sulfured and pitch, made a great blaze, and set fire to the walls, which was soon become untenable for its defenders, who left it and fled. And it was this way the fort was taken. Of the garrison, some were killed, and 200 made prisoners. Most of the rest got on board ships and returned for home. Soon after the fall of Delam, which took place 17 days after the battle, the Athenians' herald, without knowing what had happened, again came for the dead, which were now restored by the Boeotians, which were no longer answered at first. Not quite 500 Boeotians fell in the battle, and nearly 1,000 Athenians, including Hippocrates, the general, besides a great number of light troops and camp followers. Soon after this battle, Demosthenes, having the failure of his voyage to Sicily, and and of the plot on the city, availed himself of the Icarians and Megarian troops and the 400 Athenian half-lights which he had on board to make a descent to the Thessalian coast. Before all his ships had come ashore, however, the Thessians came up and routed those that landed and chased him to their ships, killing some and taking prisoners, after which they set a trophy and gave back the death after truce. About the same time as the affair of Delium, Citius, kings of Australia, died, defeated in battle, campaigned against the Triballi, Scythia's son, Sparta, Spar, Spartacus, his nephew, succeeded his nephew of Scythius, son of Spardotus, his nephew, succeeded by to the kingdom of Orid, Orid, Oresian, Odresian, sorry, and the rest of Thrace ruled by Thistocles. So what happened was our friend um, uh, uh, Thistocles died, and what happened was his nephew, in other words, his nephew, um, became Suthus, son of Sephron, his nephew, uh, succeeded the kingdom. Okay? Now, 101, 102, at the same time, Broadus, with his allies in Thrace, marched against Amphipolis with the Athenian colony near the river Strymon. Uh, um, Aristogoras and the Melians attempted to establish a settlement upon the spot which the city now stands when he fled from King Darius, but he was dislodged by Epidonian. 32 years later, the Athenians set out 10,000 of its own citizens, and whoever else chose to go to settle the region. But these were destroyed at Dracabilis by the Thracians. 29 years after the Athenians' return, Hagagon, son of Nicias, being sent out as a leader of the colony. He drove out the Eudonians and founded the city on the spot, which was formerly called um, Ennahodai, or Nine Ways. The base of which they started from was Ion, um, Ion, the commercial seaport at the mouth of the river, not more than 3 miles from the present city, which Hagar named Amphipolis because of the Strymon flows around it on two sides. And he built it so it to be conspicuous from sea and land alike, running a long wall across the river to river, which completes the circumference. Brasius now marched against the city, starting from Ain in Cleidice, arriving about dusk at Erum and Bonsicum, okay, Bramiscum, Bramisculus, um, where the lake Bolb runs into the sea. He took supper there and went on during the night. The weather was stormy and it was snowing a little, which encouraged him to hurry in order, if possible, to take everyone at Amphipolis by surprise, except the party who were to betray it. The plot involved some natives of Argulus and Darien colony who reside in Amphipolis, where they had also other accomplices won over by Picadaeus or the Cladanians. But the most active in the matter were the inhabitants of Argulus itself, which is close by, who had always been suspected by the Athenians and had designs on the place. These men now saw their opportunities arrive with Bradus, and having for some time been in correspondence with their countrymen in Amphipolis for the betrayal of the city, at once received him into Argulus and revolted from the Athenians. That same night they took him on the bridge over the river, where he found only a small guard to oppose him, and the city being some distance from the passage, and the walls not reaching down to it as present, he easily forced his way through this guard party, through though there being treasons in their ranks, and partly through there being treason in the rank, partly from the stormy state of the weather and the suddenness of attack. So he got across the bridge and became master of all the property outside. The Empotilians having houses all over the quarter. The passage of Brasidas was complete surprise the people in the city, and the capture of many of those outside, as well as the flight of the rest within the walls, combined to produce great confusion among the citizens, especially as they did not trust one another, and even said that if Bradley, instead of stopping to pillage, had advanced straight against the city, he would have probably taken it. Instead, however, he established himself where he was, overran the country outside, and for the present remained inactive, vainly awaiting a demonstration on the part of his friends within. Meanwhile, the party opposed to the traitors proved numerous enough to prevent the gates being immediately thrown open, in a concert with Ercles, the generals who had come from Athens to defend the place, sent to the other commander at Thrace, Thucydides, son of Orenos, an author of this history, who was at the island of Thassos, a Parian, Parian colony, half a day sail from Amphipolis, to tell him to come to their relief. On the receipt of the message, he at once sailed with 7 ships, which he had with him, in order, if possible, to reach Amphipolis in time to prevent its capitulation, and or in any case, to save Aeon. Meanwhile, Brasias, afraid that help would arrive from sea from Thersos, learning that Thucydides the right of working possessed the right of working the gold mines in that part of Thrace, had thus great influence with the inhabitants of the mainland, hastened to gain the city if possible, before the people of Anthropos could be encouraged by his arrival to hope that he could save them by getting together a force of allies from the sea and from Thrace, and so refused to surrender. He accordingly offered moderate terms, proclaiming that any of the Antipotians and Athenians who chose might continue to enjoy their property with full rights of citizenship. And those who did not wish to stay had 5 days to depart, taking their property with them. Upon hearing this, the bulk of the inhabitants began to change their mind, especially only a small number of the citizens were Athenians, the majority having come from various places. And also because the prisoners Bradius had taken outside had relatives within the walls. They had found the proclamation a fair one in comparison to what they feared had suggested. The Athenians were glad to get out, and as they thought they ran more risk than the rest, and did not expect any speedy relief. The multitude were generally content at being left in possession of their civil rights, and at such an unexpected reprieve from danger. The Parthians of Bradus now openly advocated this course, seeing and feeding and feeling of the people had changed, and that they no longer gave ear to the Athenian general present, and thus surrender was made, and Brassi himself was admitted by them on terms of his proclamations. And in this way, they gave up the city in late in the same day. Thucydides and his ship entered the harbor of Eton. Brasius just have gotten hold of Antipolis, and having been within a night of taking Elon, the ships had the ships been less prompt in relieving it, in the morning it would have been his. After this, the city put all in order in Aton to secure it against any present or future attack by Brasidas, and receives such as he had elected to have come from the interior according to the agreed upon terms. Meanwhile, Brasidas suddenly sailed with a number of boats down the river to Elam to see if he could not seize on the point running out from the wall and so command the entrance. And at the same time, he attacked the city by land, but was beaten off on both sides and had to content himself arranging matters in Antipolis and in the neighborhood. Mailich, okay, Mercinos, an Adonian city, also came over to him. The Adonian king Pictus, having been killed by the sons of Goyax and his own wife Bera, and Galapus and Orsim, which are Thasian colonies, followed the example not long after. Pictius too came up immediately after the capture and joined in these arrangements. The bad news of Antipholus was in the hands of the enemy, caused great alarms in Athens, not only because the city valuable for its timber it afforded for shipbuilding and the tribute money that it brought in, but also it was a barrier to movement across. It was a barrier to movement across Thrace. The escort of the Thessalians had brought the Spartans within reach of the allies of Athens as far as the river Strymon, and yet as long as they were not masters of the bridge, they and were blocked at the sea by the Athenian trains at Eton and impeded in land on the island side by the large extensive lake formed by the waters of the river. They could not advance further. Now, however, their way forward seemed open. The Athenians feared that more allies would revolt, particularly because Brandis displayed such moderation in all his conduct and declared everywhere he had been sent out to free the Hellenes. The cities subject to the Athenians hearing the capture of Antipos and the terms accorded to it and the gentleness of the Bradius felt most strongly encouraged to change their condition and sent secret messages to him, begging him to come to them, each wishing to be first to revolt. Indeed, there seemed to be danger. There seemed to be no danger in doing so. Their mistake in their estimate of Athenian power was as great as that power afterwards turned out to be. Their judgment was based more upon blind wishing than upon any sound prediction. For it is a habit of mankind to entrust to careless hope what they long for, and to use sovereign reason to thrust aside what they do not desire. What they do not desire. Besides, the the late severe blows which the Athenians had met at Botias joined the seductive though untrue statement of Bratius about the Athenians not having ventured to engage his single army at Nicaeus made the allies confident and caused them to believe that no Athenian would be sent against them. Above all, the wish to do what was agreeable at the moment, and the likelihood that they would find the Spartans full of zeal from the outset, made them eager to run the risk. Observing this, the Athenians sent garrisons to different cities, as far as possible as for such short notice in the winter. Meanwhile, Bradius sent dispatches to Sparta for reinforcements and made preparations for building trimenes in the Strymon. The Spartans, however, did not support him, partly out of envy on part of the chief men, partly because they were more bent on recovering the prisoners from the island and ending the war. In the same winter, the Megrians took and razed the foundations of the long wall which had been occupied by the Athenians, and Brennus, having captured the Antipos, marched with his allies against Acte, and prompted running out from the King's Canal with an inward curve and ending in Athos, a lofty mountain looking towards the Aegean Sea. In it were various cities. Seine is an Adrian colony lying close to the canal and facing the city in the directions of Ubia. Others are Taros, Cleon, Acrotoe, Olophilux, and Delum, and are inhabited by mixed barbarian people speaking two languages. There is also a small Cladian element, Cladidian element, but the greatest number are Terhino-Pelagians, formerly settled in Lemnos and Athens, and the Balsians and the Crestonians and the Eldonians. The cities are small ones, but most of these came over to Brasidas, Brasidas. But Sani and Dalim held out and saw their lands ravaged by him and his army. Upon their not submitting, he at once marched against Torun in Calais, which was held by the Athenian garrison, having been invaded by a few persons who were prepared to hand over the city. In other words, having invited by a few persons who were prepared to hand over the city. Arriving in the dock before the daybreak, they halted with his army near the temple of Diocrutus, rather more than a quarter mile from the city. The rest of the city of Teron, the Athenian garrison, did not perceive his approach, but his partisans, knowing that he was coming, and a few of them had secretly gone out to meet him, were on watch for his arrival, and was no sooner aware of it than they had let into them 70 lightly armed men with daggers, who alone of the 20 men ordered on this service dared to enter. Commanded by Lysistrus and Olethian. They passed through the sea wall and without being seen went up and put the sword to the garrison at the highest post of the city, which stands on the hill, and broke open the postern gate on the side of Canastrium. Brasius, meanwhile, came a little nearer, then halted with his main body, sending out 100 to be ready to rush in first. The moment that the gate should be thrown open and the beacon lighted as agreed. Some time passed in waiting and wondering the delay. The Pelarest, by degrees, got up close to the city. The Tauranians inside were working with the party who had entered, had by this time broken down the postern and opened the gates leading to the marketplace and cutting through the bar. They first brought some men around and let them in by the postern in order to strike panic into the surprised townsmen by suddenly attacking them from behind and on both sides at once, after which they raised the fire as had been agreed and took in the market gates the rest of the Pelarists by the rest of the Pelarists. Brasius, seeing the signal, told the troops to rise and dash forward amid the loud hurrahs of his men, which caused dismay among the astonished townspeople. Some burnt in straight by the gate, others some over, some square pieces of timber placed against the wall, which had fallen down and had been rebuilt to draw up stones. Bredius and his great number making straight uphill for the highest part of the city in order to take it from the top to the bottom once and for all, while the rest of the multitude spread in all directions. The capture of the city was effected before the great body of the Tauranians had recovered from their surprise and confusion. But the conspirators and the citizens of their party at once joined the invaders. Um, about 50 of the Athenian hoplites happened to be sleeping in the marketplace when the alarm reached them. Few of these were killed fighting. The rest escaped, some by land, others in two of the ships on the station, and took refuge at Lectius, a fort garrisoned by his own men in the corner of the city, running out into the sea at the end of the narrow isthmus. They were joined by the Corinthians of their party. The day now arrived, and the city being secured, Bratius made a proclamation to the Thurians who had taken refuge with the Athenians to come out, as many as chose, to their homes without fearing for their rights or persons. He had sent the herald to invite the Athenians to accept the truce and to evacuate Lucreus with the property as being Chalcidian ground. The Athenians refused this order, but asked for a truce for a day to take up their dead. Brasius granted it for 2 days, which he employed in fortifying the houses near the fort, and the Athenians in doing the same to their position. Meanwhile, he called the minion of the Taurinians, who said that he who said very much what he had said at Ankara, namely that they must not look upon those who had negotiated with him for the capture of the city as bad men or as traitors, as they had not acted as they had from corrupt motives or in order to enslave the city, but for the good and freedom of Torun, not against those who had not shared in the enterprise. Suppose that they would not equally reap its fruit, as he had not come to destroy either city or any individual in it. This was the reason for the proclamation of those that had fled for refuge for the this was the reason for his proclamation to those that had fled for refuge to the Athenians, though he thought none worse of them for their friendship with the Athenians. He believed that they had only made to the trial. In other words, he believed that they had only to make trial of the Spartans to like them as well, or even much better, as acting much more justly. It was for want of such trial that they were now afraid of them. Meanwhile, he warned them all to prepare to be staunch allies and to be to be held responsible for their faults in the future. For in the past they had not wronged the Spartans, but had been wronged by others who were too strong for them, and in opposition that they might have offered could be excused. Having encouraged them in this way, he made his attack on Lechios, and soon the truce expired, and the Athenians defended themselves from a poor wall and made some houses with parapets. For one day, they beat him off. On the next day, they were preparing to bring up the siege engines against them, from which they meant to throw fire upon the wooden defenses. And the troops were already coming up to the point where they supposed they could bring up these engines where the place was most tenable. Meanwhile, the Athenians put a wooden tower upon a house opposite and carried up a quantity of jobs cast in water and stone, and a big stone. And a large number of men also climbed up. The house, thus laden too heavily, suddenly broke down, and it was like a loud clash, at which the men who were near it saw it was more vexed and frightened. But those not so near, and still more those furthest off, thought that the place had already been taken at that point, and fled in haste to the sea and the ships. Brades, perceiving that they were deserting the parapet and seeing what was going on, dashed forward with his troops, immediately took the fort, and put to the sword all who he found in it. In this way, the place was evacuated by the Athenians, who went across in their boats to the ship at Pellene, now where the temple of Athens and Lycius and Bradius had proclaimed. Now there is a temple of Athens and Lycius, and Brasius proclaimed in the moment of making the assault that he would give 30 silvers of mina to the man first on the wall, being now of the opinion that the capture was scarcely due to human agency. He gave 30 mina to the goddess of her temple, and raised and cleared Lycius, and made a whole of it consecrated ground. The rest of the winter he spent settling in the places in his land, and making designs upon the rest. With the expiration of the winter in the 8th year has ended. So this we end at 116, chapter 116, ends the 8th year of the war. Okay, if you have any comments or questions or things like this about the winter of the 8th year, please put them below. We welcome it. You know, if you like this thing, this is this is a continuation. If you have, you can share it with someone. Um, you can subscribe if you want to see more of these things. If you had want to see, follow me on social media, you can follow it below. And if you want to support what I do here, you can do so through the two means. We finally have Patreon. Yay! I went back and had to put Patreon on everything now because so subscribe, star, and Patreon are the two mechanisms we have now. If someone wishes to help contribute, um, I hope that's right. My throat is going; it's a little dry. So have a good day. Take care. Bye bye.